Elizabeth Sparkle, renowned for her aerobics, faces a devastating blow on her 50th birthday as her boss fires her. Amid her distress, a laboratory offers her a substance which promises to transform her into an enhanced version of herself. I don't think you're ready for the substance. I think the substance might be one of my favorite movies of this year. Maybe my favorite horror movie of the year too. It's really good. Definitely one of the best movies I've seen this year. Maybe it's one of the best body horror movies I've ever seen. I'm not too versed in the horror world when it comes to body horror, but the substance is really good. Everyone from the cast to the acting was just unbelievable. Demi Moore, Margaret, Qualley. It's really good. Hi, welcome to the Horror Beans Movie Club. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and like this video. It will mean a lot and help us grow. This is The Substance.
People are gonna love that.
Before I get into the spoiler territory and we break down the movie, I think first I just want to give like a top line review of it. The Substance explores aging from a female perspective and the beauty standards that women are held to in this industry, especially in the aerobics era. Elizabeth Sparkle's character represents sort of the older generation as she reaches her quote unquote prime, and she gets fired and has to then navigate being replaced by a superior version of herself. And ultimately, the movie is trying to say that what you hold dear to yourself and your beauty and what your value is isn't physical, and it shouldn't be physical. It shouldn't be a wrinkle or eye bags or tight skin. That isn't what beauty is. It's on the inside. I guess that's kind of that's a top line understanding of the movie. The way it's told, the horror. I love how it is critiquing the industries that surround us, especially Hollywood, on beauty standards and being young and pretty, and how men age gracefully like silver foxes and more distinguished and more refined. And the women's perspective is entirely different. Dennis Quaid's character, Harvey, represents that very well in how he is like the most vile man ever. Like, he's always got food in his teeth and he's like spitting all the time and he's like slimy and you can just like smell him on the screen. You can smell his grossness. Yet he is successful and he'll probably be successful. And the movie explores all these themes in the vase of body horror. So now the spoiler section's done. Now I've given you a top line. I want to start by breaking down sort of not scene by scene, but from start to finish of The Substance. So spoilers ahead if you haven't seen the movie. I highly recommend you see this movie, by the way. This movie was really good. It's one of the best body horrors I think I've seen this year. And it got me really excited when I left the cinema. So watch at your own peril. We're now going to talk about everything that comes in the movie. We get two shots at the start of the movie that are very important to remember because we get them at the end as well, and sort of the narrative difference between the two. That's the egg splitting, which of course represents the theme of the movie very quickly, how you have two yolks that merge out of one, but they still live in the same egg. The egg is being the person. Remember the substance, they say, you are one, remember you are one, and your two yolks within the same egg, and you need to respect the space, which, as we know, if you've seen the movie, no, it doesn't happen. And then the other one is the Hollywood star, and how Elizabeth Sparkle gets her star right at the beginning, and it's clean and it's pristine and there's care. And then as time goes on, we see people walking over it and people forgetting who she was, and there starts to be cracks. And there starts to be withering away, and the letters start to get moldy, and it's showing us that as time is passing, so is her in the industry. And also, as the cracks are beginning to show on the star, she's beginning to crack as a person because she's older now. The industry is saying, "Hey, your time is up. You're getting wrinkles. Your skin's getting cracked, and now your star is as well." I also love how the guy drops the burger on the star at the end of this opening segment. And then obviously as the movie ends, we get a similar vibe with the blood from the weird creature. I thought that was a great little visual motif to start and end the movie. Big fan. Then we meet Elizabeth on her 50th birthday. I think the film does a great job of capturing how when people, the sort of the gloom you have when people say, "Oh, happy birthday," and you're like, "Oh, thank you," and it's like, fuck, shit, I'm old now. Can you stop? And she has her show and it's going really well, but obviously there is this darkness in the air because we as the audience kind of know that this might be her last show. She then goes to the bathroom, and when she goes to the bathroom, the women's is obviously closed and the men's is obviously open. Another way the film is trying to tell us that men have a lot more privileges than women in that regard. So she decides to use the men's bathroom, and she overhears a conversation with Harvey, who's introduced in this scene. Harvey saying how she's past her prime. They need someone younger. She's too old. You know, she's not going to have any children now. And he's just saying the most absurd things. And I love how the film makes him vile by having him so close to the lens, and you hear like every single drop of his piss. It's like fucking gross. She overhears this and she knows her time is up, and ultimately she does get fired from her job as the aerobics host. And then we get sort of a lot of different events happening as she realizes she's fired, and she realizes she's old, and she thinks that she thinks she's old, and she's starting to feel like she's washed up. We have the scene at the dinner where she is let go. You know, it's very sort of visceral and very like, but obviously we see the fly in the water. It represents like death, like her death is here, it's coming, she's drowning. And then of course we get her face ripped off all the billboards, which is another way of saying, hey, look, you're no longer the hot ticket. And then ultimately this crescendos with her car crash, which is sort of the explosion of emotion. And then we get the scene in the hospital where she physically does show that emotion and she cries. But this is when we're introduced to the first sort of reference to the substance. The doctor wishing her happy birthday and her bursting into tears is like the crescendo, I think, of all the things she had that happened that day. I think a lot of us can relate to that when we realize we're getting older and someone says, happy birthday, you're nearly 30, you're nearly 25, you're nearly 50. I think a lot of us can understand that feeling of like just wanting to scream, because like, thank you, but also don't do that. But this is when we get our first reference to the substance. The guy who's the nurse has a birthmark on his hand, which is a great visual motif that they come back to later, which was very obvious. If you didn't see that coming with the guy in the cafe and you didn't see that, then what were you looking at? And he kind of says, you're a great candidate. And we then learn about the substance because he slips something into her pocket. As she's leaving the hospital, we meet Fred. And I think on first viewing, I thought Fred was kind of was like really sweet and represented what she should aspire to go and pursue. But as my partner pointed out on the walk home from the cinema, Fred in that moment makes her feel valuable and gives her first sense of value, and no one else has valued her that day. And she then feels validated by that. And then when we get to that date scene later on in the movie, she's getting ready to go see Fred. She calls Fred up and she's like, I need to see you, Fred. I really want to go on a date, all this stuff. He isn't like, I read that initially as like, oh, this is the one that she was meant to be with all along. But I think that's a very basic understanding. I think what my partner told me, which I found really interesting, was like, yeah, like she wants to feel validated. So she goes to like the bottom of her barrel, some guy she knew when she was 10 years old, to like feel validated. And yeah, that's actually well more accurate than what I said. So yeah. So then she finally decides to check out the substance, and she goes to like the shady part of town, and the address is very shady, and she's reduced to a number 503. I think that's also important to represent the industry and what they're saying about the beauty industry, how you are just a number. And the offices are very shady. I think this is, to do with the nature of the industry. But inside it looks really clean. But from the outside, it's actually kind of gross. The door doesn't open all the way. I think that's showing us that the industry is gross and may look clean, but actually is kind of shady and dodgy deals done in parking lots. So she gets the substance, and we're introduced very quickly to the sort of the setup. You have step one, which is the activator, which is, which has a single use only text on it, which is definitely like a reference to what's to come. I forget the term, Chekhov's gun. It's a Chekhov's gun, but it's the idea of we're seeing this and it's going to come back later. And she doesn't use all of it, and we find out why later. And then she injects herself with it, and we get the first body horror segment of this movie where her back kind of splits open and Margaret Qualley's character comes out, and it's so well done and so disgusting. You feel it. The way the substance works is every 7 days you have to switch back. There's two bodies, two consciousness, and then when one's asleep, being injected with these little food pouches, the other person wakes up. Going into the movie, I didn't know it was going to be physical. I actually thought it was going to be sort of like a psyche thing. Like I thought that she was going to be in her head the whole time talking to her. But I'm glad it was actually physical. My worry was that when Margaret Qualley has her 7 days. She has to climb back in, which I'm glad wasn't the case. Whenever Margaret Qualley's character is taking over for the 7 days, I think we have a very clear visual difference. Like Margaret Qualley's is glossy and it's saturated and it's colorful. And then when Demi Moore has her 7 days, it's a bit dustier and it's a little desaturated and it's a lot grittier. And then Sue, who's the name of the younger version, the alternate, applies for Elizabeth's old job and gets it and becomes the new host of the aerobics show, and she feels fulfilled and happy. But every 7 days she has to be Demi and, well, Elizabeth. And when she's Elizabeth just kind of stews around and waits for that next hit, you know. And very early on, Sue kind of takes liberties with the substance. Obviously, there's the rule that you have to switch every 7 days. But Sue starts to abuse that, and she starts taking extra days by pulling liquid from her. And the effects are that when you go over your quota, it takes it from the other side. So it starts very small. I think it's like a couple of hours. But when Elizabeth wakes back up, one of her fingers aged incredibly long, and it looks really old on one finger. And it's because Sue abused the substance. This goes on for the rest of the movie. Sue slowly gets used to really loves the success and begins abusing the substance little by little to the point where she does it for 3 months. Once Elizabeth catches on to this and her finger first goes gross, she realizes she's aging quicker than she'd have thought, and she does get the opportunity to stop. That's the thing. The substance, you can stop whenever you want. And all that's wrong with her is obviously one of her fingers are really old, but she continues to stay on track and continues to use it because she knows it feels good. And this is when she reaches out to Fred, and we have this really great scene where she's deciding to go out on a date with Fred, and she feels validated and she's smiling and she seems really happy. And then she's getting ready, but she's constantly reminded of how inferior, quote, she is to, and not to Sue. I think having the billboard right outside her house is a really great visual of that. Every angle that Elizabeth is trying to get ready, you can see Sue kind of peering around corners and looking at her and reminding her of her age and her mortality. And ultimately she cancels on Fred, poor Fred, and decides to stay at home instead, which is sad. But I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of getting ready to go somewhere and being like, just, you know what, I'm just not going to go. I look horrible. I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't like my neck. I don't like my clothes. I don't like whatever. And she decides to stay, and poor Fred doesn't get a date. And then there's that really great shot where she looks at herself in the door handle and sees a very distorted look at her face. And and we realize that's how she's seeing herself right now. And it was a really great scene. I think it really stuck with me, that one. It was a really strong scene. And then she just decides to eat and just like hang out and just like not do anything, just become a couch potato. And it feels like she's trying to punish Sue in that way, because Sue obviously has that horrible scene like after this where she bends down and the chicken leg comes out of her thigh or whatever. And I think the film is trying to, I think Elizabeth is trying to punish Sue in that regard. And this is the only way she can do it, is by giving her these horrible dreams of eating chicken. I thought it was really funny when Sue wakes up and she goes in the living room and just sees like this complete platter of like fast food and chicken and horrible just everywhere. And it's I thought it was really funny how like each one has to clean up each other's mess. We have the introduction of the New Year show, which is Sue's big moment where she's going to host this New Year show for the network. And this obviously is setting up the final act. And Sue then decides, I'm just going to stay as me and abuse the substance. And she does. She does it for 3 months. And it all kind of crescendos when she just keeps pulling from Elizabeth's body until there's nothing left to pull. And she's like, the only way that she can regain that liquid to stay as Sue is to switch back. And then when we get that switch back, this is like another big step in the body horror direction, because Elizabeth is no longer recognizable. Hunchback, everything is old, her hair's fallen out, she doesn't look like herself. And this is because Sue has abused the substance for 3 months. Really horrific stuff, like really good prosthetics. You really feel for Elizabeth in this scene. And then she really wants to stop. She really wants to quit the substance, because she realized that Sue cannot be stopped, and Sue is just going to keep taking from her. And so she decides to go and stop it. And then Elizabeth attempts to terminate Sue. She goes to the substance HQ and gets a little vial where she can inject into Sue and will kill her, and it will end the experiment. But Elizabeth will stay the same as she is now, which is such a good visual, because earlier when she wanted to quit and she felt like hell, she just had a gammy finger, right? She just had a dodgy finger. And now she's become like this unrecognizable creature who's just really old and just like disheveled, that she wants to stay. But as she's about to finish Sue off with the termination, she can't do it. She stops herself and she has a line. She says, "I hate myself," or something like that. And it makes it very clear what the message of the movie is. But Sue wakes up. She resuscitates Sue somehow because she thinks she's killed her, and she realizes that she isn't done yet. She still isn't done with the substance. She's addicted to it. And Sue wakes up and it gets intense and they have a fight and Sue wins, and some really good horror, blood and guts, and smash her head against the glass and ultimately kills her. But she is swiftly reminded that the substance rules are very simple. You have to remember that you are one. You are not two separate people. You need to respect the balance, which they haven't done all movie. Sue hasn't done all movie. We very quickly learn what happens if you don't do that. Because she kills Elizabeth, realize that she is one, and she goes to the New Year's rehearsals and everything just goes wrong for her. It begins with one of her teeth falling out, another tooth falls out, and then finally her ear falls off. And she's in a panic because she knows she has to host this show, and she realized she messed up when she killed Elizabeth. So it's still Margaret Qualley, and all she's got is a missing ear and some teeth, but she realizes that she's not beautiful anymore, which again is leaning into that themes of appreciate the beauty you have. Everyone is beautiful. But she doesn't think it's enough. She thinks she's grotesque again. So she goes back home and she sees the activator. She sees the single-use activator that was introduced in the first act. And she says that she wants to be a better version of herself. And she injects herself with it. And there's a reason it's single-use. And you're about to find out why. Obviously, you're not meant to do it twice. And the same process happens again, where her back opens up and the better version of her comes out, but it is a monstros, I think it is, the monstros, Elizabeth. It is a creature. It is your classic body horror final act. You have an arm coming out of the head, out of her back. You have a face on her back, which is Demi Moore. You have like an unrecognizable face. There's a tit growing out of her eye. She still gets ready and she still goes to the show. Monstro Eliza Sues. There you go. So it's like so it's this monster blend of both of the characters, and you can see that in the face. Sue quickly covers up all reference to Elizabeth's character. Elizabeth's like the face on the back, and she covers her up, but she still wears her face. She puts lipstick on the paper cutout of Elizabeth and glues it to her face so you can't see the monster. There's a lot of subtext there. I guess you could look at it from the perspective of how, Hollywood is like trying to don't show how you really feel, just put on a big smile. And Dennis Quaid's character Harvey has a really great monologue about that. He's like, pretty girls should always smile. And I think Hollywood, you have to wear that smile and not show your true emotions or the monster underneath the paper mask, right? And then finally we get the final act is the show at the end, the New Year's show, and the monster Elizabeth Sues goes on stage with the mask on. And she says, it's me, and everyone is just in shock. And once the mask falls off by accident, everyone hates her. Everyone treats her like a monster, and they start pushing her around, and then someone cuts off her hand, and there's blood everywhere, and it's this over-the-top Shining level blood or old 80s blood, like very over-the-top type stuff. Kill Bill, I thought of a lot. And she just covers this whole room in her blood, and I don't know if there's really a deeper meaning to that beyond the gross out element of it, but the gore is really well done, and the way the carpet looks is very Shining pilled. When she's shooting blood all down the hallway, the Shining carpet is very like the orange carpet is set up very early on, and it's like it feels like a reference to The Shining. And then she leaves the stage and she's running down the street, and she just collapses and explodes into loads of meaty chunks. And all that's left is Elizabeth's face as she crawls over to her star, where she sits on the star and she looks up and she sees all the stars in the sky, and they kind of engulf her, and she slowly fades away into the cracks of the pavement. And much like the burger at the start, her remains is left on the star, the bloody mess, and some street cleaner comes and washes her away. And that's it. All traces of her are gone, and all that remains is just her name and the star, back where she was, square one. Ultimately, I think The Substance is about Hollywood's toxic relationship with women, beauty standards, and a little bit of sort of how the makeup industry is kind of selling you a lie. It has a lot of themes of that baked into this body horror aesthetic. if you're squeamish, it's going to be a tough watch. Do I think it's the scariest movie ever made? No, it's not that scary, but it's gross. It's body horror. It's like, oh God, unsettling. Ironically, more people at my screenings were feeling grossed out by the needle scenes and the than a lot of the big bloody mess scenes. I think that says a lot, especially the fingernail scenes where her fingernail starts falling off. And I think ultimately the film is about people who get past their prime and the relationship with that and the entertainment industry. And the fact that I just said past the prime implies that there is a prime, but I think it's important to understand that everyone is beautiful. I think that is ultimately the message. And it comments a lot about the commercialness of Hollywood and the commercialness of youth and beauty and innocence and stuff like this. Like Sue's aerobic show is vastly different to Elizabeth's aerobic show. Elizabeth seems to be an aerobic show, but when Sue takes over and has her own aerobic show, it definitely feels more like just sexualization of the female form. I really love the substance. I definitely think my perspective of it might change over time in terms of what I take away from the movie, but this is, fresh. I only saw it last night. This is my fresh review of it. If you watched this far, thank you so much. That's a long time to be wasting on me, so thank you. This is the Horror Beans Movie Club. I sometimes do this with friends, sometimes do it on my own. It's a weekly movie club where we watch a horror movie and talk about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.